In fact, the first show that I played was the Ohio State Fair with about 20,000 people, and I was extremely frightened. Ricky Nelson earned millions as America's sweetheart, but he couldn't even buy movie tickets. His father controlled every penny. When Ricky begged for pocket money, he was told to collect soda bottles for change. Behind the perfect family image was a darker truth. Recently discovered contracts reveal how his own parents trapped him in a deal that stole his childhood and his fortune. But that's not the worst part. New evidence shows what really happened in those final years before the plane crash. The truth will destroy everything you believed about America's most famous family. He was born into a script someone else had written. On May 8, 1940, Eric Hilliard Nelson came into the world in Teaneck, New Jersey. But by the time he could crawl, his name had already been rehearsed through microphones and stitched into studio contracts. His father, A.Z. Nelson, had already swung through the big band era with a baton in one hand and a vision in the other. His mother, Harriet Hilliard, had sung on vaudeville stages and smiled through film reels long before Ricky learned to stand. Their fame wasn't the kind that came and went. It was built into living rooms across America every week. And by October 1944, the adventures of A.Z. and Harriet had turned their family into the country's first sitcom royalty. The house Ricky grew up in didn't echo with bedtime stories or scraped knees. It pulsed with rehearsals, lighting checks, and scripts marked in pencil. Even before preschool, Harriet was teaching him how to control his breathing between verses. She never sent him to school at all. Not until she was satisfied he could sing a note without cracking. Ricky didn't ask to become a performer. He was raised like a product being polished, for a showroom window shaped by his mother's schedule and his father's ambition. By the time he was 4, his name was already printed in call sheets. At 8, he stepped into the sound booth to replace the child actor playing him on the family's radio show. No one asked if he was ready. That wasn't part of the plan. He was a sickly boy, thin, quiet, with a chest that wheezed through the night, skin that didn't seem made for cameras. Asthma kept him in bed more than recess ever would have. He wasn't bold or loud. He was slow to speak, observant, watching the world from behind a wall of studio lights and parental scripts. But in 1949, when Ricky and David finally played themselves on the airwaves, audiences didn't see the sickly kid. They heard jokes. They heard timing. They heard a little boy turning into a natural, even if behind the scenes, Ricky was just doing what he was told. Within months, the show was pulling in 20 million listeners every week. Ricky was 9 and making $200 per episode. That would be around $4,500 today, but none of it reached his hands. A.Z. kept the money. All of it. Ricky was given an allowance, so small it barely covered snacks. While other kids traded baseball cards, Ricky's father was trading his son's fame for furniture and property, vacations, and investments. By the time Ricky was 16, he had $500,000 in his name, over $5.7 million today. But he couldn't touch any of it. At 18, he was paying 93% of his income to taxes. Once just to take a girl to the movies, he had to dig through soda bottles for change. In 1952, the family moved to Hollywood, and the radio show became a television show. The living room on screen wasn't just a set. It mirrored the real one. But to Ricky, the shift to TV meant even more visibility. He was no longer a voice in the ether. He was a face, a body, a public figure. And he didn't enjoy it. He couldn't make friends, couldn't walk alone, couldn't be late to set without his father pulling him aside. There were no sleepovers, no football games, no dances without permission. A.Z. would tell him, "The family is your world." And that was that. Ricky began hiding. Not physically. He couldn't, but internally. The smiling, perfect boy on TV was rarely the same boy backstage. He battled anxiety, often excusing himself from shoots to catch his breath. He'd panic before commercials. He'd get sick before scenes, Wetties ads, magazine covers, teenage heartthrob headlines. All of them felt like masks he couldn't take off. Friends would later say he had no idea how to be himself unless someone told him who that was. By 1955, the show had won Emmys, and Ricky's face was pinned on bedroom walls across the country. The Adventures of Azy and Harriet would run for 14 seasons, a record at the time, with 435 episodes. It followed Ricky from age 8 to his 20s. It staged his first dates, first crushes, and musical awakenings. Everything felt real because it was presented as real. But off camera, it was different. Aussie didn't just direct the show. He directed Ricky's life. From school to dating to money, everything was filtered through a script written by someone else. And Ricky was expected to hit his marks. When his asthma flared, producers hid vaporizers just out of frame. When he grew tired after 12-hour shoots, Harriet reminded him the family's image came first. Red Skeleton's producer once called him an odd little kid, but behind the oddness was exhaustion. Harriet admitted later that Ricky's cheerful demeanor was often forced. His illnesses weren't pauses. They were inconveniences to be worked around. He smiled for the audience and collapsed when the camera stopped. And still, the money flowed. In 1957 and 1958, Ricky was earning $5,000 per week. In today's money, that's over $50,000 a week. Yet none of it gave him freedom. Azy used the income to pay for their Hollywood Hills estate, the Cadillacs, the country club memberships. Ricky was given a $50 allowance. He once admitted that the only way he could buy something personal was to ask permission or sneak change. Even in high school, Ricky acted out, not with drugs or rebellion, but with pranks and absences. He failed English just to see what would happen. He skipped class to blast records and sneak off to live music. He didn't want trouble. He wanted freedom. In music, he found it. It was the one place where his parents didn't fully control him. When he began recording his own songs, it was partly out of curiosity and partly out of desperation. He wanted a voice that wasn't filtered through a character. When Ricky Nelson was just 10, asthma hit him hard. Not just the kind that passed in a few days. This one lingered, forcing him to stay in bed for weeks, while other kids were outside running, yelling, living. But Ricky wasn't resting. He was memorizing scripts. Azy Nelson, his father, called it preparation for greatness. Ricky was missing school, missing birthday parties, missing the world. But on paper, he was getting ahead. The show, The Adventures of Azy and Harriet, kept growing, and Ricky's role kept growing with it. Fame and sickness blurred. Illness didn't stop his work. In fact, it became part of it. The pressure didn't let up. And over time, he stopped seeing rest as something for recovery. It became part of the job. What started as asthma turned into something bigger. It shaped how he saw childhood. It told him he wasn't a normal kid. He was an investment. When he was 12, Ricky wanted a bicycle. Nothing fancy, just something to feel the wind on his face like the other boys. Azy and Harriet said no. Not because of money, not because it was unsafe, but because it didn't match his image. They didn't want fans or reporters snapping photos of Ricky looking too ordinary. So, while his classmates pedaled around town, Ricky walked, sometimes to school, sometimes to the set. That bike, or the lack of it, left a bigger mark than they expected. It wasn't about wheels, it was about freedom. And every step he took reminded him of the things he couldn't have. The feeling settled deep. His life wasn't his. His smile, his style, his schedule, it all belonged to somebody else. At 14, the teasing started. Kids at school called him TV boy. At first, it was just joking, but Ricky felt it cut through. He wasn't one of them. He lived in two worlds. One had studio lights and scripted laughter. The other had locker rooms and cafeteria jokes, and he didn't belong in either. Harriet tried to help. She arranged bonding moments on set, tried to turn the fake family into something real. But the warmth was staged, and Ricky knew it. The more they tried, the more it reminded him of what he did not have. And the teasing would not stop. Ricky withdrew. He felt more comfort pretending on camera than trying to connect off it. By 16, Ricky Nelson made over $500,000. Adjusted to 2024, that was about $362 million. But he didn't feel rich. His parents gave him just $50 a week. The rest was locked away. They said it was to protect him from being spoiled. But Ricky didn't feel protected. He felt powerless. One night, when he wanted to take a girl to the movies, he even didn't have the cash, So he gathered empty soda bottles, turned them in for coins, and bought the tickets that way. He later admitted it made him feel worthless. On screen, he was a star. In real life, he was just a kid counting nickels. The gap between who he